Hey everyone, welcome and thanks for tuning into LCC Remix Roundtable Edition. This is a discussion where our pastors unpack the current message in a deeper way. We hope this episode encourages and speaks to you.
All right, do you know what time it is?
Time to make the donuts.
Time to make the donuts.
Wow.
Way to bring back that 1980s Dunkin' Donuts reference.
You sounded too alive to do that, though.
Yeah, we're
Time to make the donuts.
Yeah, we're on the cutting edge of culture here at
Yes,
Life
we are.
Church.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but it's time to make the donuts, as it were. And if you don't know what that is a reference to, just YouTube it. You'll
find it.
You'll find it. Welcome to another episode of LCC Remix, where we are continuing our current series, A Firm Foundation, taking a look at how to build our lives upon Christ Jesus and the importance of spiritual disciplines in our lives. And this week, we had Pastor Aaron Sharon.
Wow.
Waka, 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 waka. Waka, waka, waka.
on the importance of rest. So we are going to talk about rest today, and
wake me up when it's done.
yeah, I was about to say we're just going to start out by taking a 15-minute nap. So we'll provide some
soft music,
some ocean sounds for you. If you're driving, don't take a nap, but maybe if you're just home, we'll just hear some ocean sounds for you.
Yes. Sing.
Don't you feel relaxed now?
A little bit of a shock to my system. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm afraid that
It's the opposite of rest.
was the opposite. Yeah, hopefully just no one spazzed out when they heard that. But
Hopefully not.
yeah,
So
be calm.
I don't know why I was thinking of an old Simon and Garfunkel song. Silence.
The sound of silence.
Silence is simply the absence of sound.
Yeah.
Yeah. They did a remake of that, The Sound of Starbucks.
Yes.
Sound of
Tim
Starbucks.
Hawkins.
Tim Hawkins. Really funny.
Sound of Starbucks. Yes. Yes. All right. Well, let's take a rest and talk about rest. Or get to work talking about rest.
What a contradiction.
Yeah, what a contradiction.
Why is it so hard? Well, first off, what is rest and why is it so very, very difficult?
Well, rest is stopping, right? Just stopping. And it was interesting. I was looking at a thing this morning that was talking about the difference between a day off and Sabbath. Almost like the difference between taking a day off from your job per se. Because we tend to always think about our day off as a day on to things at home.
Yeah.
or other things, or a day on for shopping, or a day on for like a lot of things that we're still doing. So we're still doing things. So talking about the difference between a day off and intentionally taking a Sabbath, taking a stop.
Well, it's a question. Is it a rest for your mind or for your body? Because the way I've looked at it, if I wasn't doing my job, what I do with the other 40 hours a week, whatever, and I'm doing something that I enjoy or it's relaxing to me, but I'm still in motion. I'm still what someone else might perceive as working, but to me that's rest. You work all week and Saturday or whatever, you mow the lawn. I'm sitting on a riding lawnmower driving around my yard. It's not a whole lot of physical labor, but people go, "Why are you working?" Well, I'm not. I'm sitting here driving around my front lawn.
Yeah.
So is that work, or am I not resting? To me, or if you got you got something you like to tinker with, or whatever. So your day off, from work or whatever, you go out in the garage and you tinker, and that's relaxing to you. It gets your mind off things, so. is that rest, or is it rest means just sit in a chair and stare out the window for 16 hours before you go to bed?
I think the concept of rest when it comes to the biblical Sabbath is to be intentional about that pause, that beat where we are more keenly focused on who God is and his presence in our life. Not that we don't experience that every day. And Jesus himself said, we've entered in, he's our Sabbath rest. He's the Lord of the Sabbath, and that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. And so there's this difference between the kind of that Pharisaical notion of let's make a bunch of rules to make sure we don't violate the Sabbath so we can honor the Sabbath, but the heart behind it was very far from the Lord. And so I do think, yes, we can find rest in other things, of course, for some people, whether it's riding the lawnmower, like you said, or gardening, or, in some sort of hobby. It may appear like work to some people, and we can find rest, but I guess it's, what do we do in that moment in terms of our communion with the Lord? Do we really take the time to commune with him? That's a struggle. That's been a struggle of mine. I talked about it a few weeks ago. I want to be more intentional about, keeping a Sabbath. And it's hard because you find space and it's like, okay, let me fill it up with all the chores that I was not able to get done this week.
Yeah.
And let's just cram the schedule full of the things we say we have to do, and I'm not being super intentional about, okay, when am I going to just stop and, okay, Lord, this day is about you.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's just kind of where I am.
Well, and I think that's the difference between the day off, which can be therapeutic for you on a spiritual level as well. We talk about all the time around here, like sometimes just moving chairs around can be very, very therapeutic. Like it can be good for the soul, just because you're in motion doing something and thinking through. But the idea of Sabbath, as God set it up, is like, I heard this, if you're running it through a filter, it's through a filter, is what I'm doing delighting in the Lord, and is what I'm doing in worship to the Lord. And if I can say yes definitively to both of those, and then that's part of my Sabbath that I'm intentionally setting apart to again focus on that rest for my soul as opposed to that body rest. Because you can ask, get in trouble. You can ask a lot of young people who sleep 13 hours a day if their body is rest. They could say, "Yeah, I'm great," but as far as their souls being at rest, they're far from it.
Yeah.
Which is part of the reason they sleep 13 hours a day sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, that intentional setting aside a day to focus on the delighting in the Lord, whether you're delighting in the Lord with your family or delighting in the Lord alone, and then worshiping him. And if you can put it through that filter, now you're talking about that spiritual Sabbath that God wove into creation at the beginning for us, and we tend to, like a lot of things, I feel like we tend to, I guess, dumb it down is not really the right way to say it, but we minimize it and just say, well, if I just take a day off, and do all those things on my list that, didn't get done, for all you out there who are list makers, our lives become about like, have I checked off the stuff on my list today? If I haven't checked off the things on my list, then my day is a failure.
I live with one of those list makers.
So do I.
Yeah, and almost sometimes having to. Even this past weekend, like there were certain things on the list. We got several things done, but it was almost this disappointment. Well, I had these two other things I really wanted to get done today, and I didn't get them done because I'm exhausted at this point. And I said, "It's okay. No, you're the one making the list. No one is putting this pressure on you. Yes. This isn't about your livelihood. This isn't like this is your creation, your stress you're putting on yourself. And I remember saying it's okay to rest.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Well, and so many times we put our own value on the value of ourselves. Am I good enough? Am I doing what's right based on what I'm accomplishing? And that looks different for a lot of people, but it comes down to the same thing. Like,
it's interesting, like if you as you travel around the world, the cultural difference, even in our world today, between various cultures and how they view time and how they view community, how they view doing life together. I'm talking about believers too. I mean, we have like an Americanized version of like this concept, modern day vernacular. I guess it's still sort of relevant, this idea of the grind, right? You're out there hustling, you're grinding, you're working every day. So when you see that there's time over here, you fill it with whatever. I mean, you talked about it on Sunday, this idea like people look at their calendar and say, well, I have a vacation in August. And then when they go on vacation, I'm guilty of this. We cram it with so much stuff that you come back and you're like, yeah, I'm so glad to be home to get back to my routine because at least I can have a little bit of rest.
Well, I could never rest on vacation because running a business, and then having animals at home and stuff, and I just I'm like on edge the whole time. I just want to get home so I can rest, and know everything's okay.
It's so funny. So is the rest you're describing and that I've experienced? Is it more the comfort of our routine? Because like I was started to say a second ago, other cultures, they don't have such a regimented every minute of every day is planned out. It's really about time with one another. And I mean, even their church services look completely different. Like Sundays are many cases, like an all day event where people are together and they worship together. And then they're going from home to home and they're greeting one another and everyone's sharing food, and just, I mean, genuine fellowship, and then when the work takes place during the week, people are, I've been in villages where there's younger people drawing water from hand dug wells, and they're doing the work for all the older people because they're able to do that. They're younger, and then you have some people that are preparing meals for everyone all day, and some people that are out in the fields working, and it's a very like a communal kind of lifestyle, and it's a different rhythm. You talked about rhythm, and our rhythm is so frantic.
Yeah, it can be.
So do we find comfort in what you said a minute ago? Like, do we mistake routine as rest? Like, in other words, do we find comfort in routine? Are we really resting, or are we just comfortable in our routine? And I think individually we have to. I mean, yes, I think you can find rest in that, but it's that intentionality, I think, again, of like, okay, Lord, the big piece of, Lord, where are you in the midst of all this? Yeah. I don't know. Just a thought.
I try and go back because our, Bible times, what did Abraham's day look like?
Well, he set his watch in the morning.
So it kind of could bring some clarity, hopefully some clarity. But so 7 day, or actually, I always joked, people, why are you working on Saturday? Because the Bible says you're supposed to work 6 days. Yeah. So anyway, it doesn't usually fly too much because we're used to a 5-day work week. But so you work 6 days, and the 7th day you rest. I'm pretty sure none of those guys ever went on vacation, went away. They still had their things to take care of, whatever. But it was just that day was different. Mm-hmm. It was an intentionally different day. Mm-hmm. If you still had, everybody was, agrarian society, you still had, your animals still had to have water and food, mm-hmm. So you did those things, but it was an intentionally different day, and that day was set aside. And, when you get into, the Pharisees and stuff, they went crazy. If you slid your chair across the floor and you happen to scrape up some dirt, oh my gosh, you're plowing, and you violated the Sabbath, If you pick up your pillow and walk across, whatever, you're oh my gosh, you're working, No. I think, if you're working.
If your ox was stuck, you could get it out of the.
Yeah, well, because, right. Because they'd all lose their animals if they didn't. Right. But say, well, I work these days. This day I'm not going to. I set this day aside, so I'm going to be at home with my family. I'm going to do whatever, and intentionally setting that day aside. We set, we have our Sabbath is typically Sunday, where that's to me that's a special day of the week. We come together as a body of believers. We fellowship together. We worship together. You don't, some people, we have such crazy job schedules now. Some people are forced to do whatever, but I think it's more of that intentionally setting aside that time. And I think we need to intentionally set aside that time daily too, and so, whatever, having that quiet time, when it comes to be a devotional time or time alone with the Lord, that's a rest that should be part of our you hate to say daily routine, but daily routine, but it, that just taking that one day a week or whatever, that time to separate that time, that's what sanctified means separate, to sanctify that time and refresh, spend time with the Lord, spend time with your family, spend time, all those things. It is crucial, and you have to do that to recharge to whatever. So for me, I've actually, especially when I've been really busy in my working like crazy and taking a day and, believe it or not, going out and cleaning out the chicken coop and being out with the birds and just whatever. And I at the end of the day, I was so refreshed, like, man, that just, it wasn't that this big thing was hanging over my head. It was a different routine. It was something different. And for me, that's how I, like you hunting, you kind of spend time with the Lord that way. Spending time with the Lord doesn't mean sitting there with a book in your lap.
Yeah.
It can be those times when you're just in nature or whatever, you're doing things that recharge you, refresh you, and you can, dedicate that time to the Lord. So there's my rant.
There's your rant. No, that's. Yeah, and you talk about the different rhythms, even daily. And like I remember first starting to go to Guatemala for missions trips and being so frustrated because, we wouldn't start actually moving towards a work site until after 10 o'clock in the morning. And, and we'd sit around and there you're watching the people who live there, and they're having coffee and they're talking with each other and they're just enjoying each other, and we'll get to work. And then you work from like 10 to 12, you have an hour lunch where the same thing happens, siesta time, and, and then you work till 4, and it's like, wow, I feel like we're leaving so many hours out where we could get things done. And it took a while to just realize, like, no, it's more than just getting a project done. It's just more than accomplishing something. And so that daily rhythm that they live in, like we said, is different, and that, like you're saying, that setting that time apart for the Lord, and we talk all the time about, like, not, reading 3 verses in a story. It's, it's finding a place and a time where you can delight in the Lord, and it doesn't have to say, well, I got through this many chapters this morning. It's like, no, man, I just, that's why I mentioned hunting, because, sitting on a tree stand before dark and hearing that first bird start singing, and then just kind of, a lot of times something walks underneath you, and just before light, and just kind of watching the world. It just delighting in God's creation is good for the soul. And so do we make that time daily, and intentionally, not just to take a nap, but to delight in Him and then to worship Him in that. So,
yeah.
And it's interesting. Did you know that in Genesis 2 is the first time that holy is mentioned in the Bible, is used in the Bible, when God said, when He said in the Sabbath He made it holy. It was the first time that word was used, in God's word. And so it was funny. I was listening to somebody talk about how one of the hermeneutics of some of the older people is like, it's this idea of the first time it's mentioned in the Bible kind of defines for us what it means throughout the rest of the Bible. And I'm not sure if that's totally true, but but it's the first time that he says holy, he made it holy, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Sanctified, set apart.
Yeah, all that kind of, he made it special.
Mm-hmm.
I think is what it is. In that rhythm. The other thing about blessed is, talk about creation. He blessed 3 things in creation. He blessed the animals.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." He blessed the people. Same thing, "Be fruitful, multiply and fill the earth." And then he blessed the Sabbath. And so one commentary I was reading kind of equated that to, like, the Sabbath is created to, again, multiply within us, who God is, and it's created to fill us, with Him, with His presence, and so there's a real purpose to Sabbath,
mm-hmm.
And it isn't just we tend to just put it on, like, if my body is rested, I'm good,
mm-hmm.
But like we were saying, it's so much more than just bodily rest, or energy. It is that communion, like you said earlier, the communion with God,
mm-hmm.
where you set apart time to just be with Him,
mm-hmm.
And doing that, thinking through that thing, like, how do I do that as a family? Not just as an individual, but how do I disciple my kids, in this way of Sabbath, and so that we, it's so hard, especially as a family in our culture, to take a day, in whatever day that is. It may be Saturday or Sunday, but it might be, a different day. But to take a day and just say, hey, we're gonna turn all the phones off. We're gonna take the TV away. We're just gonna be a family and Sabbath. We're gonna eat together. We're gonna just talk about what the Lord is doing in our lives together. We're gonna we may play some game, but we're just gonna be together and delight in each other in that day. And that just, I don't know. We look at people who practice that as like they're strange in some way.
When you look at, like, call it recreation, it's recreation.
Yeah.
It's taken out of what you normally would do in the grind we talk about, that push. And so, for emotionally and spiritually and all those things, mentally, you recreate, and so you spend that time in, it's that time that's just separated, it's set apart, and it's time, spend time with the Lord, but we should always be spending time with the Lord,
mm-hmm.
Well, that should be I always look at things in relationship, how our natural relationship, husband and wife, if I just told my wife, okay, I'll see you next week, Sunday's yours, I won't, I'll drop a note here and there along the way, but no, but you're always in tune, you're always,
mm-hmm.
but you have those special times. And that's what, the kind of like the Sabbath, to me it's that special time you set us, you deliberately set that aside, mm-hmm. to be with, and even a husband and wife, you go do something together, and it's get you out of the normal, and you're recreating, you're kind of refreshing things, and it's just to spend time and go do something you like to do together, and it's. Yeah. It adds a new, because we all get caught in these. Well, they say a grave is a rut with the ends kicked out, and we all get caught in ruts.
Yeah,
because we do the same thing over and over. Every day's a grind. Every day,
mm-hmm.
get up this time, and I'm a schedule person, so I wake up this time, and I in my mind, I never write this down. I'm not a list person, but I have them up here, lots of them.
You have a mental list.
Yeah. Yes, it's just not on a piece of paper, because I wouldn't be able to find a piece of paper again. But,
right.
but it's just easier to write it down in my head. And
Craig's mental note.
Yeah. And but just to kind of break that routine, and and it's a recreation, is what it is. Yeah. You're refreshing, restarting over a little bit again, and that's all part of God's design.
Yeah.
So I don't need to rest. Well, I don't think God needed to rest either.
Right.
He has no need. But he said, this is the way you do it. Mm-hmm. And remember, keep this holy. Keep it separated. I just looked up what holy is. It's sanctified, separated.
Yeah.
To be set apart.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
To be different.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the words in there is hallowed, holy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we deliberately, okay, today's the day. And one of the things I think it also means is, God, you're in control.
Yeah.
And I don't have to be on call 7 days a week.
Yeah.
So I can rest today because I'm not in control.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of that. We got to, okay, God's in control. I'm here. I'm along for the ride, and he's told me to take this rest, take this time. And so it's in his hands. I'm going to step back,
Yeah, it's an act of faith.
Yeah. So
he gives us his reminders daily. I mean, our need for sleep, the theology of sleep. You're right. We do need to rest, and we're not in control. And he is much bigger, as you said. I mean, he's the one that never slumbers nor sleeps.
Yeah.
I think I said it last week. We have a false impression of our own importance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Somehow, if I don't do this, who else is going to do it? And I get that, in certain contexts, in a moment, yes, you're critically important to something going on. You may be the only person in that moment who can do that certain thing, but don't conflate that with this idea that God's not able to use someone else or raise up someone else. Or, you don't ever think like we're so key and we're all non-essential, basically.
the sun's still going to come up tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when we're at, when we have sickness or, dis-ease or disease, we call it dis-ease, it's a reminder too, like, okay, I'm injured. I have an illness. It's a reminder of my own frailty, my own need for God, my own forced rest to recover, Lord willing. And, again, it's a reminder at the end of the day, if I leave this earth or you leave this earth, it will be sad and heartbreaking for people in your life. But as one of my former pastors said, still going to gather together and eat potato salad after your funeral somewhere, or eat lunch together.
Yeah.
And not that there's, it's this idea of moving forward. Life will go on.
Yeah.
Well, and be
Won't look the
sure,
same, but it'll go on.
David wrote, he makes me lay down in green pastures. And you can take that word "makes," and apply it to sometimes like he just has to. Okay, slow down. You need to stop. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you guys find if when I go through a really, really stressful time or season and I'm go, very often when that stops naturally is when I get sick. It's like go, stop. It's like you finally breathe and then all of a sudden you're sick. Like, what in the world?
Yeah.
They've done studies on that with people who are self-employed, that kind of thing. You don't get paid days off. You don't get sick near as much.
Yeah.
And even with life insurance and stuff, going through all that stuff, and there's studies around that where people with applying for life insurance, one of the things are you self-employed? Do you all that kind of, because you're used to getting up every day and doing it and making it work, and they look at you differently because of that.
Yeah,
and it's when you do stop at the end that you're like your body relaxes or something, and and then you end up getting sick. And
unfortunately, that a lot of people when they retire, if they just move to a life of leisure, where they don't do anything, they start just sitting in front of the TV. They don't have a hobby, and I volunteer part-time job.
Yeah,
they don't live long.
Yeah, that's true.
You mentioned, I think in first service maybe last week, the fact that I think it was. Individuals who do take a Sabbath live on average, was it like 11 years?
11 years longer.
Longer than
they did a study.
That's pretty cool.
Of regular Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and they did do it. They did a study at Liberty University. They did like 18 weeks or something of tracking, taking taking a whole day Sabbath, and had multiple health impacts. Just by getting into that rhythm of, the rhythm that God created. I work for 6 days and I rest for one, and literally just resting for one.
Yeah.
I don't know, like we're talking about, the rest is resting in Him for that day as opposed to just stopping. I don't know what they did in those studies, but physically they found that if you put that into the rhythm of your day, it is going to have major health benefits as you get older.
Yeah.
Which for us old guys is good news.
Well, your body repairs itself when you're resting. It doesn't repair yourself when you're working.
Yeah. Right, but we live in that, like, I'll just work through it. I'm just going to push through it. I'm just going to push through it.
Yeah.
That little pain in my knee, it'll go away. It'll be fine.
Yeah, I've been waiting since last April for mine to go away. It's getting better. I keep telling myself.
I'm like 10 years,
better.
10 years into that. So,
it's just, the flexibility is starting to come back a little bit. But, I'm sure I'm just one wrong step away. Speaking of wrong steps, I fell down a flight of stairs yesterday.
Oh, God.
Banged my head. Pretty sure I gave myself a concussion, saw the flash of light. Had this gone down this morning quite a bit. But
Steve's in concussion protocol today.
I told the board last night, I was like looking around and I'm like, if I say anything super weird, like I was just like out of it all day yesterday. Yeah, I missed that second step. Down I went.
Oh.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. That is crazy.
Yeah. It's just weird.
I go downstairs backwards now.
Yeah.
Just because of my knees.
Yep. Yeah. There's a lesson in there somewhere.
Yeah. So the tension that I had on Sunday was, and all week leading up to it, was obviously the events that happened last week. And, and which Matthew 11 is a natural step in the progression of rest. But I felt like it had a little bit additional meaning, I guess, last week. And, in Jesus saying, "Come, all you are heavy laden, and heavy burden." And I don't know if I'm adding to it or whatever, but thinking like so many were heavy laden last week in just, suffering for friends and family and loss, and not just with the accident in DC, but it feels like, and several people said to me over the week, like it just feels like right now there's one thing after another that's just one punch after another, and personally, and in our community. In our state, in our community. I mean, just feels like there's a lot of, I'm kind of ramping up emotionally for next week, going to Tennessee and just talking with people who lost everything and are just, and may physically be okay on some level, but emotionally have just gone through it. And, just meditating on that verse, and the fact that, in Jesus we have this deeper rest, not just a physical rest, but the rest for our souls. And I know it was encouraging to me last week. I don't know, if people see that and if people heard that, like that there is comfort and rest in Jesus. Whether you're heavy laden physically or heavy laden spiritually or emotionally, he is always there, and he's gentle and humble in those moments, and just wants you to come as you are. And so it took a kind of a little bit of a shift from where I was headed, just because feeling the weight of that, and and just realizing how many people, just in our church community, are struggling with the loss. So just go in that direction a little bit.
Yeah, it was a great reminder, that idea of, taking the Lord's yoke. I mean, I love how you explain that, it's, and you use the pair of oxen, but you talked about, the more mature, representing the Lord, and the young one trying to have, do its own thing, go its own direction, but how you have to learn to walk in rhythm with the Lord. And it was a good mental image to, kind of dwell on and think, yes, when those burdens seem heavy, we're not there shouldering it on our own. He really is there. And I don't remember the percentages, but I do know, like, when animals are yoked together, you actually get more work out of the animals together than you get with just the power of each animal individually. It actually, you would think, like, okay, you have two, now I get twice as much power, but there's actually, I don't know the exact percentage, it's even more. And this is the idea that when you you team them together, more is accomplished than they would ever do, individually. So, there's something in that too, with the Lord.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a great reminder, because there are a lot of people struggling right now. Yeah. There is a heaviness.
Yeah, definitely.
It's, reminded, we're told in Scripture, to put on the garment of praise, over that spirit of like we exchange that spirit of heaviness for a garment of praise, and it can be so hard to praise the Lord even in the heaviness, but there's something in that. I mean, throughout the Old Testament, we read passages like that. We read about the importance of, we've been talking about Sabbath, but how if we do truly honor that, there is blessing, there is health, there is peace, there is when I say prosperity, don't misunderstand. I'm not like prosperity gospel stuff. I'm just saying, like, that your way will be blessed in everything that you do, because you're focused on the Lord.
Yeah.
And that has to carry over to every day of your life. And it does.
Yeah.
I think it's a good picture of, and we talk about, having peace, in the storm, having peace, in our daily lives with Christ. And that's what you're explaining right there, is just the idea that no matter what's coming at me, I have to handle it, and I've got to deal with it. And so often, especially with difficulties and loss, we tend to want to push it away. And we're not commanded to push it away. We want to deal with it, but deal with it with that peace that passes understanding, peace of God in the middle of it. And it doesn't mean you don't mourn. It doesn't mean you don't grieve. It doesn't mean you don't cry. It doesn't mean you don't, hurt.
Or question at times. In the middle of your, that's what faith is, overcoming doubt. It's not an absence of doubt. It's overcoming doubt with belief, trust, Can you trust in something if you don't have doubt to overcome? I don't think.
Well, that's
think
courage,
it's possible, right?
Courage is, you can't have courage without fear. Right. You can't have, all those things. You can't have faith without doubt. I look at about Jesus said, unless you have faith for a little child. I remember years ago, I was going through a very, very difficult time, and a lesson I learned was, for me, it went like that whole picture thing again, and I would spend time with the Lord. I literally felt like a child crawling up in Daddy's lap, and there were times I would just sit there for hours, and just be there, and so it's this in those times of when these bad things happen or whatever, or when you're just at your wit's end or whatever. That's really what grace is, Another way of looking at it, I'm a picture thinker, So for me, it's, life is like walking this tightrope, and it's, it's difficult. It's very difficult. But grace is, the tightrope is 2 feet off the ground, And so there's times, you got to walk the tightrope. It's just, you can't get from point A to point B without, But grace is, you can stop and stand on firm ground for a minute, And so, that ties right back into the yoke and learn of me, for, that's what the beauty, one of the beautiful things that Christ offers us is not this, in many religions, it's you just obedient, no questions asked, boom, you just do it, or you don't make it. And with Jesus, he said, "Come unto me." You're worn out and beat up, and you're heavy laden and you're crushed under this weight of stuff. And he goes, "'Cause I'm gentle you know, and we can find our rest there.
Yeah.
And so that's powerful. So in those times when, man, things are just falling apart, you can crawl up in daddy's lap.
Mm-hmm.
And for, you know, a child, what safer place is there to be?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's I love, little kids. It's so cool because they crawl up in your lap and you know, they're, nothing can touch them,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so we have that kind of relationship with our Heavenly Father, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the reflex of the infant or the toddler or the young child is, I'm thinking of my grandson, as he's walking and they see you and they put both hands in the air and they're longing for you just to pick them up.
Yeah.
And again, it's, of course, once you pick him up, he starts pointing like he wants to go that way and that way and that way.
You're
Look
just
at that.
you're just a
You're
vehicle.
the vehicle. But and sometimes
You walk faster than he
sometimes
does.
we look at the Lord that way, do we not? We're like,
Oh,
okay,
yeah,
Lord,
yeah, yeah.
I'm resting in you.
Right.
But could we go over here and could we do this and and really? But some of those beautiful moments are honestly like when they fall asleep.
Yeah.
Or they need to be comforted and they just lay their head down on your shoulder and eventually they just fall asleep because they feel secure.
Yep.
And that's it's a good image that you painted there, Greg, with this idea of our Heavenly Father. And sometimes there's just no words. I mean, there's sometimes we, to describe what that looks like. Sometimes that's in the sorrow and the sadness and the brokenness, as you're talking about, and we don't even know what to say.
Yeah.
But we're just like, Lord, help. Lord,
Yeah.
I need you. Jesus, I don't understand. This hurts.
Yep.
And he has come through every time in my life. I know that every single time.
Yeah.
And when I say come through, he provides the peace. There are things that happen in life that we do not get the answers to the questions we ask, and we do not get the result that we think it should be, but we get Jesus, and that's by far better.
Yeah.
And we just have to rely on him.
I heard a song years ago. I remember I was in Florida on vacation that I didn't like, and just kidding, because I was stressed out about my job. But I had to pull myself away from my family. But I enjoyed being with my family, But anyway, but I remember that I heard a song when I was down there on a Christian radio station in Florida, and basically I don't know what it's called. I don't know the title of the song or even who sings it, but just the song was, sometimes he calms the storm, and sometimes he calms his child.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing for either one of those. Sometimes he'll calm you in the midst of the storm.
Yeah.
Sometimes he takes care of the storm.
Yeah.
Like he did with his disciples. But other times with his disciples, they went through it, but he calmed them. He was with them. And so we have to be willing to endure either one of those or go through, according to his will, those things.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good song.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So often, I think all the things that we talk about and all the things that we kind of work through, it seems to always come back down to very simple trust in what God is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Am I in relationship with Him? Am I walking with the Lord? Because all that we're talking about, this peace, this some kind of understanding only comes when we're walking with Him. Like in what you're talking about, as far as jumping up on it, like it requires us to stop.
Yeah.
And so often we get so frustrated because I'm not feeling the peace of God. Well, have you stopped? Have you just stopped? Shabbat, have you Sabbath? Have you just stopped and spent time just like you said, just sitting there, like not even necessarily listening to worship music, which will take you a multitude of different places, as you listen to it, but just resting in and the other song about it that comes to mind is "Praise You in the Storm." Are we taking the time to just praise the Lord, for all that He has done and all that He is, even in the midst of our struggles and our storms, and I don't know, just the proper having the perspective of a follower or a child of the Lord, of God, whose sole aim is to glorify Him and be in His presence, and not that a matter of fact, it's probably more trouble that comes to your life the deeper into that you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. We're all just taking a rest at this moment.
Awkward pause.
It's important. How do you, little bit of a side note, but dealing with the Sabbath, I know we've all probably had conversations with individuals in the past, but how do you talk to somebody who's very dogmatic in their idea of Sabbath to the point of they either believe unless you take that day off and don't do anything, so for some that's Sunday, and here in the not too distant past, and I think some states still have like blue laws where certain businesses are closed on Sundays. Mm-hmm. Car dealers are like that in Maryland still. Car dealers are closed on Sundays. I'm still trying to figure that out, and but that has to go back to. But there was a time like grocery stores and restaurants. Chick-fil-A's closed, and that's a choice that they obviously make. But there were at one time laws on the books that were kind of forcing people to make Sunday the Sabbath. And so some people became, like my grandfather's generation, I watched them practice Sunday as Sabbath. Sundays when you went to church, Sundays when you didn't work. There was no yard work taking place. This is church, time together with family, visiting family, going and visiting, relatives. Kind of like we were talking, there was a lot of intentionality, and then, and within their time, going from the time of not having like plumbing and electricity, and then no TVs, they had radio, but to see that progression, but even to the point of like, we're not traveling, we're not doing certain things on Sundays, and then people who keep that, and then others who, like Seventh-day Adventists, who are very much like, unless you keep the biblical seventh day, which is our Saturday, we call it, you're somehow you're in not only an error, but some people within that denomination and others, almost like we are intentionally participating in a false worship of God or a false. I know this is a little bit of a side note, but how do you? How have you? I'm sure you both have had to have conversations with people in the past. I know I have. How do you talk to people who are very dogmatic about that idea of Sabbath? How would you?
Go ahead, Aaron. I'm looking something up.
And I have an idea, but go ahead.
No, I looked in like thinking through like the beginning of creation and the fact that God, and even we talked on Sunday about the Israelites who, before the 10 Commandments even came out, were gather for 6 days and then rest, and it was a gift, and so it's almost that tension between God did set it apart as a gift, as something for us to grow and be filled in, and yet by the time Jesus comes, it's this huge, heavy burden. And so when I've talked with people, it's like, well, the Sabbath is never meant to be a burden, and what's crazy is that in doing nothing, I'm often burdened by that. I've had some friends who have decided as a family to go back to that almost Old Testament way of living when it comes to the Sabbath. And so, like you said, we're doing literally nothing, and then you tie that to, looking at it from a perspective of, our Sabbath is created to delight and to worship the Lord. And we do that through so many different things. Like Greg said, I can delight in the Lord riding my lawn tractor around mowing my lawn. I can delight in the Lord, obviously eating with friends and family. There's a lot of ways we can delight in the Lord. And there's a lot of ways we can worship him. And so, I don't know, it's hard when we become so restrictive in what we do, and then the other piece of that is, and then we condemn others who don't do it the way that we do it. I
That's
just
some people's spiritual gift, though.
My spiritual gift is criticism and condemnation.
Pointing out your faults, yeah.
Oh, my word. That is not a gift.
No, so Paul, writing to the Colossians, says, "Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of a holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days." And so we are not under the law, we're under grace. Yeah. And so, it's not, we are to rest. We're to find our rest in Christ. But if you're in a situation where, my goodness, so take the people down in Tennessee or whatever, or, these flood victims. So if someone is going to be, very, very, abiding to the law, say there's, their churches are all wiped out. Their community's wiped out. And so if they can't take Sunday or Saturday to worship, because they're trying to put their lives together, are they sinning? Absolutely not.
Right.
Right. God is not up there waiting for you to step out of line to squash you, and so there's this principle of a Sabbath day's rest, and we are to adhere to that, yes, because it's a gift that God has given us. But if something happens, boy, Jesus made a big point of that, David in eating the bread that was sanctified for the priests, and the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. The disciples were hungry and they're going through the fields, which was lawful. It was okay to do that. You could go through somebody's field and eat what you could eat there, but you couldn't, actually pack it up and take it out.
Go sell it.
Yeah, go to the market.
Keep it. Yeah.
But, they were criticizing, they were, picking grain on the Sabbath. Well, they were hungry. God's more concerned about the person, and so if people would take these things and make that their hill to die on, I think the heart's wrong. There's something else going on there, because if you have to live and die by the letter of the law, you have no idea what grace is about. Now God has, there's a time in my life I had to work on Sundays a lot, or in college, that's the only time I could work.
You can work on Sunday. It's not the Sabbath.
Well, yeah, I worked on Saturdays as well. So 1 year in college, I worked 28-hour shift, one 28-hour shift. It was on the weekend, so I could go to school the rest of the time. That was the only time I could, So I worked Saturday straight through into Sunday, 28 hours straight. And it was crazy, but I did it, because then that would free me up to go to class and I wouldn't have to be juggling all that, Was I sinning? Because no, but so we make these things too much, it's the idea of taking a time. And that may look different for me than it does for you. Like I said, for me to come home after working hard all day, come home on a Sunday after church, it's relaxing to go sit on a lawnmower. It's not work to me.
Right.
It's not work to me.
Yeah.
So if somebody tries to condemn me for that, I think you have other issues you need to work on. Where for someone else that might be a thing. We can get into that. Paul goes on a whole diatribe about if your conscience is bothered by this, for you it's sin. If your conscience isn't bothered, for them it's not sin. Now that doesn't make on the surface that looks weird,
and it doesn't apply if your conscience is seared. Like he says in Romans, their conscience has been seared, so they don't look at anything as sin.
If you look at
hand it over to the reprobate mind.
If you're deliberately violating things that are very clearly spelled out in Scripture, and you're not feeling something, you have much deeper issues. Your conscience is seared at that point. But so to argue those things, find something else to argue about that's worthwhile. Seriously,
I think Paula does admonish to avoid vain arguments, and that's a vain argument. Have nothing to do with those that are caught up in vain arguments.
So it was legal for a Jew to walk a mile, but if he walked 1.2 miles, he's violating the Sabbath. But what they would do to get around it, they would send a slave ahead, a mile ahead, because you could only walk a mile from your property. So you would stage your guy a mile away, and that's how so they skirted the issue. But they were obeying the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law they weren't, and so we follow. People fall in because it's easier for people, I think, sometimes to obey the letter of the law like that. It makes them feel better.
Yeah, I think the key there is to not make it about us, but make it about the Lord.
Yeah,
and that should be how we live our lives every day.
Yeah.
He who loses his life for my sake will find it.
Yeah.
That's what we're called to do. So,
yeah. Good question.
Yeah, I just it comes up every now and then. I mean, we've had I've attended churches. I've served at churches where people have been there for years and they leave to go to another denomination that's a Sabbath keeper. They feel very convicted about, it was all set up by Constantine, and we're worshiping we're not even worshiping the same God. I'm like,
yeah,
you have really gone down the conspiracy theory hole. But
yeah. And I think it's my son and his wife. They set aside a Sabbath, and I think it's great. They do it as a family. I know a lot of people do that, and that's awesome. But it doesn't have to be as rigid, I think, is the key. You don't have to, have that list out, and
your oven on Sabbath mode, like it's already preheated, and I know.
You don't have
elevators,
to tear your toilet paper so you're not doing work, and that kind of thing. And you could, if that makes you feel better, but don't put that on anyone else.
Your bidet is always running. I'm just kidding. Who has a bidet? Oh, I do.
All right. Oh my,
that's so weird.
Cleanliness is next to godliness.
Yeah. Thank you, Puritans, for making us think that's in Scripture.
First Aaron,
chapter
First
2.
Aaron.
Aaron. At least Aaron's name would sound like a biblical book.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Oh my.
Who's up this week?
I am speaking this week. I must confess. On confession.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm kind of going to talk about confession, which in the simplest terms is saying the same thing about something. When we talk biblically, it's agreeing with God about something. But we're going to talk about confession. I'm going to talk about confession as it pertains to most of our minds as to, confessing sin, to the Lord, to one another, and seeking forgiveness. But it actually goes beyond that. This idea of confession of we want to always be saying what God says and in agreement with what God says in every area. And that's what we saw Jesus do time and time again. He said, I only do what my Father does. I only say what my Father says.
Well, worship and stuff is an act of confession.
It is. And so, the Westminster Confession, and different things. We're in agreement about what we're saying. We believe this is what God is saying. So, so that's kind of the 30-second prelude to that. But
I read something on Oswald Chambers the other day. He talked about admitting and confessing are not the same thing.
No, they're not. Not at all. You can admit that something occurred, absolutely, but not be in agreement at all that it's right, wrong, or whatever.
So it's confession it's a whole nother level.
It is so tied into our prayer life, into our just how we deal with one another. It is, and it's something I think that if we could really get a hold of, like any of these disciplines, if we can get a hold of it, it'll revolutionize the way you live. It really will. Yeah, it really will.
With that in mind, I think we should institute a siesta from 12 to 1 every day.
A siesta.
At the church here.
A siesta.
There are cots in the right now.
Do it while the
safe
cots are
nights
set up.
cots are here. That would be a little weird, just laying in someone else's cot. But
oh my.
So looking forward to Sunday, and I think the following week is Pastor Greg with generosity.
Yeah.
Is that's not the last one, is it?
No.
I think Aaron's is the last one.
Fasting is the last one.
Fasting, yeah.
Yeah.
So
very good.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Aaron, looking forward to hearing about the trip down to
Yeah. Yeah.
See.
I think it's going to be, we had a good group of 17, 18 people going.
That's awesome.
Wow, awesome.
And we've got some marching orders and things that need to get done. And hopefully this is one of several trips that are going to be going down there to help.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, I'll be there next week. And you know, if you're listening, pray for the team. We'll be working, but we'll also be, you know, ministering to people and talking with people and just encouraging, you know, people who are there. And so, we're looking forward to it.
That's
awesome.
That's the biggest thing I've found on trips like that is that there is the mission, as it were, and sometimes we can be very focused on how do we like get this house cleaned up, or how do we rebuild this roof, and that's all important. But for those people, the biggest thing I found is the fact that I can't believe people from far away came here. Like, why are you here? And they can make the connection between your love for Jesus and therefore your action showing compassion and love towards them. I mean, every individual that, you know, being part of stuff like with Samaritan's Purse was a little different, but like every time, like people will break down. They want prayer.
Yeah.
You know, they want to know who Jesus is. They just I can't believe you're here.
Yeah.
You know why? And it's because of what Jesus has done in us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
all the work is just a vehicle to get you to that point.
Exactly.
Seriously, that's what
it really
is.
is.
True. That's like the you know, the sideline stuff, and it's what actually happens with relationships with people and you know, ministering to people.
Yeah. For people who feel completely lost and broken and alone, to know they're not alone, and to know that, and asking those questions like, God, why did this happen? You know, and then to see the people of God show up and love that way. I really am excited to hear the stories. And so we'll probably have to do a little special recording next week. We'll do a separate podcast on just what was going on there.
Yeah. No, that'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Cool.
Wonderful. Well, we are grateful for you listening to this podcast, and we hope that you found it a blessing, and we want to encourage you to take time to rest in the Lord. No matter what you're facing, rest in Him.
Thanks for listening to LCC Remix. If you have any questions about this podcast, reach out via email at lccremix@lifechurchcalvert.com. LCC Remix is a podcast ministry of Life Church Calvert, located in Huntingtown, Maryland. You can visit our website, lifechurchcalvert.com, or download our app by typing in Life Church Calvert in your app store today.